So welcome everyone, thank you for coming. We have a big crowd today, so I apologize for all those in back that you might have to stand for some, if not all of the evening. But thank you again for everyone who is here today. Thank you for Jackie for introducing the evening, and also to the youth committee that helped to organize this event. The youth committee is an advisory committee for the Our Youth Our Response research project. So Jackie introduced that project a little bit, but it's a research project out of Dalhousie University, and with that project to date, we have collected HIV and HCV prevention policies across the Atlantic region. And we've done an analysis of those policies using a gender and sex-based analysis. So the youth advisory team that I was talking about has been very important in helping guide this process and making sure that the research project meets all of the considerations, I guess, for youth. So again, I'm Pam Hudson, and I will be a co-moderator for tonight. And Zach, if you'd like to come up.
Sure. Yay! Very happy to be here. I'm so glad there's so many people here. This is amazing in this packed venue. Very happy to be joining you from St. John's, Newfoundland. I'll try not to talk too fast. So what we're going to do is we've got a series of panelists that are going to be speaking. And first we have Cindy Ochen, who is going to be talking about the implications of the first year's findings. And Cindy completed a master's degree in medical anthropology and women's health at U of T. And she's currently a medical student at Dalhousie and is a member of the Youth Advisory Committee for Our Youth Our Response. Cindy's interested in HIV and HCV prevention among youth stems from her interest in the social determinants of health, inequalities in health, and collaboration across disciplines. So Cindy, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Great.
Thank you for that introduction. So I'm just going to comment a bit on some of the findings of the first phase of the Our Youth Our Response project. Firstly, I guess my interest in being involved in this project really stems kind of from what Zach just mentioned, my research interests. During my master's, I was particularly interested in immigrant women's health and kind of some of the narratives that intersect when we consider the experience of health in Canada. And so a lot of those interests kind of cross with the work here. And I really do think that youth involvement is very important in the conception of these research projects and in the policies that we're interested in here. So as Pam and Jackie stated, the first phase of the Our Youth Our Response project consisted of a collection of grey and academic literature related to HIV and hepatitis C prevention in youth in Atlantic Canada, followed by an analysis of the findings. So there were a number of themes that were deemed relevant in the categories, and I'll touch on these shortly. The three broad categories that were looked at were gender-based analysis, youth focus of development, and relevance to urban and rural populations. So the process consisted of retrieving these policies, and the policies were scored on a 3-point system based on high prevalence of the themes that I'll mention in a second to absence of the themes. And then there was kind of an addition made up, and then kind of just a percentage of how many of these documents spoke of different themes. So these themes under gender-based analysis were sex, gender, gender identity, gender roles, gender relations, institutionalized gender, diversity, and equity. Under youth focus of development, looked at development in partnership with youth, youth focus of development, and then finally looking at urban populations and rural populations. So basically what was done was this 3-point system that I just mentioned. And for most of the categories, I can just kind of summarize, more than half didn't mention most of those things that I just said. So sex, gender, gender identity, a lot of those themes weren't either mentioned or brought up. So that's an interesting finding. Where we did see different themes that less than half didn't discuss were in youth focus, so the idea of development in partnership with youth, and then a lot of them did mention urban and rural populations. So just other things to kind of consider following these results are the idea of the diversity of data and the depth of the data. A lot of the academic literature focused on Halifax and Cape Breton, for example, in Nova Scotia. A lot of these articles were published using really old data sets. A lot of them were published in the 90s, that kind of thing. So kind of raises questions as to why may that be? Why hasn't there been new research done with HIV, hepatitis C policy? Some of the policies demonstrated a lack of being evidence-informed. So that was another topic that came up. And then there's the urban-rural divide. So like I just mentioned, Cape Breton and Halifax were mentioned often in these studies. Halifax was a preferred location for research. So it's questionable whether or not using data only from Cape Breton and Halifax, it can really reflect the province, can really reflect Atlantic Canada. And then finally, policies that did mention sex and gender often conflated the two, and this is still an issue in a lot of research. Confusion between the differences between sex and gender, conflation of gender roles, relations, this kind of thing. Few of the policies demonstrated new or novel policies or practices. Some of them did integrate mental health and addiction services, which was novel for Nova Scotia.
We have technology.
Oh, excellent. Almost done, but.
Great, good. And so I am pretty much done here, but I guess some of the next steps I think are kind of looking at why we found some of the things we found. What does that mean? Is it a question of ignorance? Is it a question of just indifference? So those are some of the things we can consider as we move on into future phases of the project.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Cindy. We're going to have an opportunity to talk later and to ask questions. So right now we're just going to keep moving with some of the other presenters. We have next Dr. Jack Carabinel, who is Professor of Social Work at Dalhousie in the Faculty of Health Professions. And he's a co-investigator, as Jackie mentioned, on the project. And he's worked a lot with homeless young people in Toronto, Montreal, Halifax, and Guatemala. He's published numerous academic articles and artworks about housing stability, service delivery systems, street health, and homeless youth culture. And his most recent book, entitled Leaving the Streets, Stories of Canadian Youth, published in 2010 by Fernwood Publishing. So here he is, Jeff himself.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm not going to speak about this project. I was asked more to speak about just work that I've done with young people over the years, and as noted by Zach, around primarily young people living on the street. Hopefully we have a little time to show one of the artworks, which I think is a lovely metaphor for kind of what I'm going to speak to. So I was asked to speak about kind of youth engagement. A lot of my work has been around this idea of community-based research. And there's some core tenets to community-based research. One is that the kind of idea of the research kind of emerges from the community, whatever that community is. In some of my most recent work, it has been kind of young people that are on the verge of kind of exiting the streets. So it's been that group of folks that we've really tried to engage from the beginning to kind of work with us around the particular ideas we have. So the ideas emerge in the community. So for example, in our recent study that Jean's part of here, Jean Hughes, it has been a community of service providers that we engaged right at the beginning around ideas of how we kind of want to shape this. So that's the first piece, emerges in the community. Secondly, is that as many aspects of the research are kind of shaped in a participatory realm with our members, with our participants, with our partners. So from writing out questions to thinking about design, going through ethics, to data collection, data analysis, we really try to engage as many of our partners as possible to help shape those processes. And this is not easy work. It's complex, it's messy, it's muddled, but I think it's very, very fruitful for kind of the end results. Thirdly is this notion that the findings return to the community. It can go to other places as well, but the notion that kind of our data, our analysis, our conclusions, recommendations are first and foremost provided within our particular communities, and we begin to think through how we can kind of mobilize or translate that stuff to actual change. And then the last tenet of community-based research is this notion of change, trying to implement some form of change from our research. It just doesn't sit within kind of academic realms. What I've become really interested in the last several years has been a kind of the part after all that, which is around mobilizing data, mobilizing knowledge, translating it. And I found that one of the lovely mediums to do that is through art. One of the pieces from early on when I was working on the streets with a lot of young people, I was always floored by just the amount of creativity and artistic endeavors that these young people engage in day out to make sense of their world. So I kind of have wanted to kind of exploit that in terms of getting our recommendations out there to a larger audience in much more popular forms as well. Because rarely do people go into libraries to look at academic journals these days, or academic conferences, stuff like that. So we wanted to get this out in different ways. And art also, not only is it the end result of very talented, thoughtful products that emerge, but it's also the process, the doing of it, which has always wowed me. We had a film camp with young people on the streets several years ago, and we spent the whole summer in a studio working on different art pieces. The animated shorts are one example of it. But I was like, that was lovely, but there was really, I didn't really care about the end result. I was really impressed by the community that was formed amongst about 10 of us. And we brought our kids, our dogs, we built something that was much larger than what we imagined at first. And that's always been very important. So process is as important as the end result. And like I said, it's very muddy and messy, and a lot of times we didn't know, people would come back the next day, or the issue around conflict. So we had to really get a sense of how we're going to play in and play out all that stuff. So I think I'm going to show one of the shorts. So there's a couple of animated shorts. They've been broadcasted in many different venues, but the one I'm going to show, if we can actually show it, is a bit of tongue-in-cheek, surrealist. No, it's not. It's going to be, okay. This one, I think, speaks a lot. This is one young person.
Browns, dirt, garbage. Uniforms, I smell street meat, rotting fruit. Shoulders rubbing as everyone rushes to wherever. Thousands of people washing up and down the sidewalk in waves, always moving. City names, street names, unimportant. It's all the same. Layers upon layers of man-made shit. In this world I feel out of place, uninspired and alone. I feel beneath everything, and yet somehow beyond it. Isolated and out of touch. And really, I'm okay with that. I think I'll be moving on.
So, a whole bunch of these animated shorts emerged from this film camp. And I think one of the lovely pieces of it is that when we all sat together at first and started to imagine how we could kind of look at some of the research we've all done together and carve out a different way to interpret and express it to larger audiences. It was the young people that came up with notions of doing animation. None of us knew anything about animation. We had kind of coined this a film project, because some of us knew about film, and that's what we thought. But once it kind of emerged that the young people were really, really impressed with this style. This is kind of old style animation. So we had to kind of learn that. We had to get community mentors involved. But it was all scripted, edited, written. The music was all kind of shaped by these young people, which was really, really impressive. And it also demonstrated that if around this notion of youth engagement, if it's meaningful, if there's a kind of a purpose to bringing people together, if it's not tokenized, it can actually really create some really interesting results. And we're still deeply involved with these young people in our work. And it just, to me, kind of is a good metaphor for how we actually can do this thing of youth engagement and do it somewhat healthy and in a way that builds community.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I think that we've heard some great findings from our youth, our response first year. We have PowerPoints printed out, just some of the details about that research project. So if you'd like to take a look at those or bring one home with you, you can come see me in a little bit. And we've also heard some great points about youth involvement in research from Jeff, so thank you. So our next speaker is Alicia Sweezy. So Alicia is a Mi'kmaq youth from Eel Grande First Nation, New Brunswick. And by day, she's an office manager for a commercial fishery co-op with her community. And her pastimes are talking about everything sex, sexuality, and sexual health. And also especially promoting awareness for HIV and AIDS. So Alicia is also the New Brunswick rep for the National Aboriginal Youth Council on HIV/AIDS. and that is through the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network. And she's had that position for a little while now, since 2010. So I'll give the mic to Alicia now.
Hi, hello. Thank you for, inviting me to come and speak with you tonight. I'm really nervous. I'm not used to speaking in front of adults or people that are above the ages of 16. So forgive me, I may ramble and I may lose my train of thought. So I guess tonight, for my 10 minutes, I'm just going to talk about some of my own experiences in prevention efforts. And I'll try and touch on how youth can get involved in prevention and leadership. So quickly, I should start off then by giving a quick background on the youth council that I'm involved with, NACHA, which is the National Aboriginal Youth Council on HIV/AIDS, and I believe up until recently, it was the only national council on HIV/AIDS that was led by Aboriginal youth. Our membership consists of one Aboriginal youth from each province and territory, and currently we have vacancies in Newfoundland, Labrador, Ontario, and the Yukon. We are always actively recruiting to fill these vacancies because it's extremely important for the Youth Council that we have this wide variety of youth representation, and we try to be as inclusive as possible to not just welcome First Nation, Métis, Inuit, but also APHAs, gay, lesbian, bi, transgender, and our two-spirited brothers and sisters. So 2.5 years ago, that I've been involved with NACHA, we have successfully created a 5-year strategic plan, and we are also currently dabbling in research for the first time with hoping to develop our own peer-based education manual that will be for youth, by youth, and on HIV/AIDS. So, since becoming a member of NACHA, I've been actively involved in HIV/AIDS, working within sexual health, and doing community work with my community and with youth for 2.5 years. My interest in sexual health predates NACHA. I've been pretty involved and vocal on issues of sexual health pretty much my entire life. I believe it began in kindergarten. However, prior to NACHA, I knew nothing about HIV/AIDS. It was not an issue that was talked about in my community or talked about ever in any of the sex education that I had received in high school. It was completely ignored and just left out. So what were my first-hand experiences with HIV prevention? Up until NACHA, I had none. I had no working knowledge of HIV or prevention strategies. I can only assume that at the time, I guess HIV prevention was just not a priority. I had no idea of how HIV affected me specifically as a youth, as an Aboriginal, or as a woman. And when I began working with NACHA, I was quickly overwhelmed by the reality that of the situation that my people were in. Aboriginal youth in Canada is the largest and fastest growing population experiencing the effects of HIV/AIDS at alarmingly high rates than any other group. This did not sit well with me because how can something of an epidemic proportion not be talked about? I believe, I've always believed that prevention starts with education, specifically meaningful education. Education that has been designed to meet the needs of the audience that you're actually talking to. So youth-friendly, youth-positive, and for me as a First Nation youth, culturally relevant information on HIV prevention is key. One of the things that I found particularly frustrating when I set out to educate myself on HIV/AIDS as it pertains to me as a First Nation youth and from my region of New Brunswick was that there was a complete lack of information out there. I quickly realized that my search for answers was going to be a fruitless cause because you can't find what doesn't yet exist. And it was around that same time that I was introduced to a project called Taking Action. and the amazingness that is art-based research. Taking Action is a for youth by youth community-based research project that uses art-based approaches to engage youth in HIV prevention by encouraging youth to be active players in the education process. 2 years ago, I was given the opportunity to be a youth coordinator for a 3-day workshop within my community that would loosely model the Taking Action project, and it was very much a life-changing experience for me. The goal of the workshop was to explore how Aboriginal youth understand HIV in relation to their communities and their culture. This is exactly what I needed and what I was looking for at the time. I had never participated in anything like this before, and even though I was the youth coordinator for the event, it was also very much a learning experience for myself, because this was my first time in learning about HIV prevention. What I loved about Taking Action was its recognition in the power of peer-to-peer education and the emphasis it put on the importance of inspiring leadership. At the end of the weekend, what the youth have is this mountain of resources that they design, that they can identify with, and that they can take and use with them within their community to educate their families and future youth. Taking Action is a prime example of what meaningful youth involvement should look like. And from what I learned in that weekend is that art-based research is a great way to get youth engaged. What I find to be effective about projects like Taking Action and art-based research versus the one-size-fits-all model that unfortunately is still being forced onto youth today is that it recognizes that not all youth are the same. We all come from different walks of life, different situations, different circumstances, different cultures, different backgrounds, and we all face our own unique challenges. So because of this, we must respectfully shut up and listen to what youth have to say. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I have left is, with what I know and have learned through my own experiences, I guess, to this point through art-based research, is that if we are going to begin filling in these gaps that exist within programming and services currently available to Aboriginal youth, then we need to not just include youth in discussions on youth issues, we need to actually make the youth leaders of them. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at today. I guess that's it.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And I forgot to mention, I think that Alicia is on the Response Community Advisory team, so the Youth Advisory team, as is Cindy and a few other people that are here. So Danielle Smith in the back, Vicky is here as well. We have Anne in the back too, and we have Priyanka Manava, who is here, and she's going to walk us through the breakout activity, which we'll be doing now.
So first off, I would like to thank all the speakers. We have 3 different activities set out for you guys. And first off, the first one is we would like to get you guys to do in little groups. And we have posters at the tables here and in the back corner, I think. And we would just like you to jot down your ideas about the policies, anything that is related to HIV and HCV prevention programs. And we also have a canvas in the back that we would like you to pretty much do the same thing, but at a bigger scale, I guess. And in the back wall, like right next to the canvas, there is a spot for you guys to put down your sticky notes with your ideas down, and they go in like the policy, research, and prevention ideas that you might have, or basically anything else you would think of. These will be used later on at events like this and also for our research. And yeah, you will get back in 30 minutes or so for like discussion questions at a larger scale. Thank you.
So anything that you've talked about in your discussion groups or anything that you've added to the little art center over there, or any questions that you have, if anyone would like to come up. Or you can yell it out if you'd like.
I knew this was going to happen. So I knew this was going to happen. So, oh, is there someone here?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. I don't need the mic. Can everyone hear me? Can I talk about it? Okay, great. Our group actually came up with kind of a question that we were looking for clarification on, and we've identified the importance of bringing youth into decision making and making sure that we're youth focused and bringing them into leadership roles. But in terms of actual recruitment, what's our strategy for actually going and pulling in youth to these types of discussions? That's our question. And that might be a tough one because I know we're supposed to be giving ideas, but that was thrown out to anyone who. First of all, does anyone have any answers that come to mind for that question? That's a tough one to answer.
Food.
Jeff. Oh, Jeff.
Oh, good. I think there's a lot of strategies. I don't think there's just one. So for some of the work that I've been involved with, it depends on what stages we actually think it's best to actually kind of do the mobilizing to engage and recruit folks. We always want to kind of have kind of community orientation to the beginning focus. And then we tend to work with a lot of service providers to kind of shape the way it's going to look. We always open up to young people, but there's that point where ethics also gets very muddy. So if we're collecting data with young people, about young people, it gets messy. So it's at points where we ask that young people not be engaged at particular design mechanism and then bring them in more to parts that they want to be part of. So we can always open it up and see where they fit best, where they want to fit best. And around recruitment, I tend to go to all the places where young people are and see if they actually want to be involved in this stuff. So very, very open. And the first question always is, well, what's the agenda? And I'm always amazed by that because there is no agenda. They just want to be part of it to provide their insights to help shape this stuff. That would be lovely. And I think the people who engage with us are those that find that meaningful. And then kind of after you've kind of made those connections kind of, I think, continue. And we can get more recruitment down the road at different avenues. So I think it's kind of just a whole, lots of different dimensions of recruiting, engagement, thinking about when's the right time. It's complex. And also, it's about giving up ownership, which is a really, really big piece, especially in academic worlds where, kind of, if you're going to go get grants or you're going to go through EPIC, they want to know that it's actually the academic who's kind of running the show. So you do community-based stuff, you have to kind of change that around and be strategic of how you're going to shape things. So a lot of times, we help young people get involved, inform us on these processes, and then tell us when they actually want to be more meaningfully part of it.
I got a big voice. Just building on what Jeff is saying, the other issue that I think that we wrestle with, and I certainly wrestle with through ethics on a number of occasions, is acknowledgement of what people contribute. And very often, ethics committees expect, particularly if it's young people, you want to volunteer your time and your information, etc., and that's really nice. And I've always had how about you give them a little gift certificate about something? I have a very strong belief that you pay money for people's time, and it's taken me a long time to get that through ethics. and make the case that you're asking youth to contribute their time, to contribute their expertise, and we should value that. And just the same way as when we ask physicians to participate in research, they're never usually going to do it unless they get paid. So we should be paying the young people too. And it should be real money, and then people get upset if it says, yeah, but what do we know what the young people are going to do with the money? And I said, does anybody ask you what you do with your income?
Mm.
So I think, and it's not just money, it's acknowledging the contribution, the expertise that young people make, and I think that's really important.
Thank you.
One thing I guess on the youth advisory committee that we have talked about, we did mention this question did come up and how we could get the younger generations involved, and like especially students in high school and maybe middle school involved. Was one like an idea that was kind of going around was we could talk to their teachers, and we could get like maybe somehow get some assignment points or like graded on it, and that way they're more willing to do it instead of just kind of seeing nowhere like it going with their time involved in the research, but somehow making grants on getting the teachers involved in the school community as well.
Thank you. Any other comments on that question?
Just to add to Amanda's comment, I think that's a pretty great idea. Just because when you want to get youth involvement, a lot of times youth leaders tend to be a certain subset of youth, and you don't really get a full picture of a youth population. You get a small picture of a subset of youth, and you really want to reach all of them to get a full picture of what youth are facing. So I think the school system is a key component for that.
And that's a really important point. Whoever's going to be in the youth advisory group or part of the team does not speak for that whole population. And we forget that a lot. There's a huge diversity. And the people who tend to want to engage sometimes are different than the rest of the population. Mm-hmm. So if you want a broader spectrum, you have to go with diverse mechanisms to kind of seek that out and make it meaningful. I always go back to people are going they're going to be involved if they feel that this is meaningful work, and you're not tokenizing participation.
Can I ask a question about what are the differences in mobilizing youth around a health issue in general, and then mobilizing youth around HIV in particular, or hepatitis C in particular? I don't know if you had that discussion at your tables, but I would suggest that there are differences. I wonder if anyone wants to sort of offer their comments on some of the challenges, because clearly with the issue of tokenism, you don't want to then find the N of 1 HIV positive or HCV positive youth and have them be the person who comes and speaks to people, although we know that people, for a variety of reasons, like that. But can I ask if people have that conversation about how you meaningfully mobilize and engage youth, particularly around the issues of HIV and hepatitis C prevention?
Yes, Jackie. Any comments or thoughts on that specifically?
In one of my classes in women gender studies, it was interesting to learn that the topic of sexual education in North America did come up. And even though I find it would be very hard to get youth involved in this particular topic, because even though ours is a very secular society, it is we kind of like read and understood that it is very hard of a subject matter to talk about, and people don't really talk about it unless you're in literally in the main sort of like health related areas, but if not, it's still a very taboo of a subject matter, and especially for young youth who just don't, they have a certain notion and certain idea about it, and they just don't understand the whole picture, and it is very hard for, as far as for research, to get them involved, because they might still be like, they might still think that it is taboo, and it is very like, oh, maybe I don't want to do it, and it is, I think, up to the society itself to kind of break the barrier and not make it a topic of, like, we have to really talk and discuss about it. I think that's one way to kind of get you involved.
I think what has been important with some of the work that I've done with youth is that talking to them about HIV as if it's not this isolated issue, making connections with them through through like the links in their daily lives. Like, for example, we talk a lot about colonization, we talk a lot about residential schooling, we talk a lot about these other links that are all, I guess, underneath the same umbrella. And when it, I guess, like when it, in relation to HIV/AIDS, you also find yourself that you're talking about issues like poverty, like unemployment, like a lot of social detriment. And I think it's making those links that brings it back to full circle to making them realize that this, HIV/AIDS, does, I guess, affect me.
I was just in our group, one of the things that I commented on, because I'm a teacher and I teach at the community college right now, but I was a public school teacher in Halifax. And I just find that, and I was saying that, I find our province is a little stifled in the whole sexual education area. And, I remember a few years ago, like, in order for my daughter to pick up the book in grade 7 about sexual health, you have to sign a waiver, and a lot of, anytime you want to mention something about sexual health in this province, everybody seems to tense up, and, everybody's worried about what you might say, and as a teacher, a lot of teachers are out there worried about, okay, well, what if I say the wrong thing, or what if I make a mistake, and who's going to phone the school, and who's going to complain, and am I going to get hired again next year if I say this, And so I think in order to really engage youth in the schools, you really have to have parents feeling more comfortable about what's going to happen, what kind of information are my kids going to receive, and I think you have to have teachers a little better educated and, for them to buy in order to be able to, support students getting involved and encourage students to get involved. And then I think you'd have a wider, a greater number of people who would be interested in this. So, I think you kind of have to almost, go about getting youth in a roundabout way by getting more support from parents or more support from teachers.
And the side of that might be educating parents as well, or accessing parents or caregivers or trusted adults to get them used to the message, used to the lesson. And that's a really inexpensive thing to do. And we have, I know over the years, I've had parents phone me or this is prior to email, but phone me or email me and say, could you talk about, or we don't know the answers, and you know the answers, so we want you to deal with it. Rather than parents saying, don't talk about sex, we have parents who are saying, please talk about it, so I don't have to talk about it.
And that is within the context of a really hypersexualized society. So youth and kids are exposed to sexualization messages over and over and over again. And we're setting up a scenario where they're getting their information from the internet, they're getting their information from
the schoolyard, wherever, but they're not getting it from the parents, they're not getting it from the school, and it's not even the same language that's being.
And a lot of the information they're getting is incorrect.
Well, it's very, very incorrect.
Just kind of thinking about it, HIV education in general, there's still, I think, a lot of tendency for people to think, okay, it's not going to happen to me. Can't happen in Halifax. It wouldn't happen in Nova Scotia. I mean, they're thinking, okay, this might happen to you if you're in New York, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, San Francisco, bigger places. And so, I think it would be helpful to have information about, okay, what are the HIV stats here in Nova Scotia? I know when I talk about used to be STDs, but my daughter informs me now it's STI. But when I do that with my students, one of the things that I do is I go online, I go to the Department of Health, and I pull off the statistics. And I don't want to know the statistics for Toronto or Vancouver. I want to know what are the statistics for Halifax. How many cases of chlamydia do we have in Halifax? When I show that kind of stuff to my students, then my students say, you know what? Maybe it could happen to me. Maybe I do need to worry about it because here's the number of people here in Halifax that are dealing with this trauma. So we need to make that kind of information available to people. They have students need to realize, or young people need to realize that there are young people in Halifax who have HIV or who have hepatitis C. I've actually had students of mine that passed away from HIV and AIDS. So, people need to hear about that kind of stuff, that it does happen.
What do you think is the best way to make that happen?
I went online today to try to pick up some, what are the HIV facts and what are the statistics and stuff. So I came up with some, I did this very quickly in about 15 minutes before my students and I were coming over, but, I got some Canadian data, but I didn't get any Nova Scotia data because it doesn't happen in Nova Scotia, I guess. So where's my provincial data? Where's my, how do I help people realize that it's happening here?
There's a new surveillance report that just jumped in.
Yeah, I got that.
You got that?
I think presenting data in a way that is engaging, and this is not just for you, that's for anyone that you want to communicate a message to, but there are analogies and ways that you can speak to people that speak much more clearly than read this piece of paper with all these stats on it. If your parents buy lottery tickets, you ever think about winning the lottery? Well, it's probably more likely that this and this and this is going to happen. You engage in 6 steps and blah, blah, blah. That's a kind of a wow factor to a fact that, oh my God, only people on TV get AIDS, or only celebrities get HIV, or athletes, or whoever your stereotype is. And so I think that the way that the facts are presented is just as important as whether or not they're there or not. Because you can put that in the curriculum, and you can have, like you mentioned, a teacher who's not comfortable with the material or communicating the message, and it's like it's not there. And so I think that's a really key component in speaking with, like I said, people in general, but particularly youth.
Something that our group was talking about is that was mentioned earlier, the divide between rural and urban. We are still really spread out in Atlantic Canada, and we really do need to pay attention to what do you do when you live in a very small community. You don't dare go into the store to buy anything because everybody knows you and your parents. So what do you do? And I think that's a crucial issue that we're in Atlantic Canada. It's one close across Canada, but Atlantic Canada is a reality. We need to pay attention to it and find out how do we make information accessible. How do I ask a question? How do I talk? Where can I go? Because even if there's a really nice person close by, Mike probably does know everybody in your family, and I make a little phone call to your parents or something. So what do you do? How do you have a little conversation about something you're nervous about? I really do think we can pay attention to it.
One thing that our group talked about was perhaps a discrepancy between the people who are making the policies and the people who are impacted by different diseases or different ailments. So because of the disconnect, perhaps the policies aren't the most effective policies that they could be, and that I think that can contribute to kind of the vicious cycle that you were talking about in the past, where some parents want teachers to talk about sex and sexual health, and other parents won't sign the waiver for their children to get the sexual health information booklets, and I think it just perpetuates the cycle that these topics are taboo and just perpetuates the stigma, I think, around HIV and HCV. So I think by engaging youth and by engaging the populations that are actually impacted in the policy, I think it can go about to create more effective influential policies. Thank you. Some really good comments though.
I think people have been coming up with great strategies, but I think we need to go further as well and look more at advocacy in our government, because all of these strategies are awesome, but as organizations, if we don't have the money to be able to put this work into place, it's just not going to happen. We need to become more political and push and look more at the higher and wider picture so that we can then do this work on the ground.
So I would then follow up with that and say, how do we do that? So a lot of the things I've been hearing people talk about is educational reform, curriculum reform. So we know that talking to students and getting them to tell us how they like to receive information and what they're going to Google to find and what they're learning and how they're affected by they're bombarded by media and that kind of thing. Or implementing the curriculum that Sarah Flicker developed from Ontario would be fabulous. But how would we do that? It's not necessarily just activities these organizations that have all the clinical knowledge, but is it a research project that we need to do to show that evidence-based practices and best practices and doing this advocacy piece along with the research to include educational reform, or who do we lobby and how do we lobby and how do we make that happen? Go team. Just throw it out there.
Oh, I need to make something. I think that the idea of Alicia's, what is the youth organization? I think that's the way to go about it, yeah. Because if we can't make changes like that, that's not in our hands. It's things that we can do right now, which is try and engage as many people as we can. And I think that when you think of youth as less mature, but also more mature than the way that we're describing them, because, yeah, sex is taboo to them, and they're going to laugh about it, and they're not going to understand, they're not going to take it seriously until they can actually feel comfortable asking questions or talking to someone that isn't necessarily a teacher, or not that they shouldn't feel comfortable talking to teachers, but someone that's more on their level, like a youth leader, or just get in there on their level, rather than, I do think targeting above is due, but start low.
Okay. Just raising a notion, I don't think I need, but my area is mental health, and that's equally stigmatized. And some of the strategies that are used now are phone supports, which actually don't cost as much in the long run, so that it's available to anybody. Anybody can ask a question. I guess I was just thinking in terms of rural communities, etc. What you might feel comfortable talking on the phone, because it's somebody who is on the phone who lives in a different part of the province, perhaps. But we have a number of initiatives where we started out, certainly in mental health, thinking that we've got a lot of telehealth support systems, and they thought we won't introduce telepsychiatry because nobody with a mental health problem will ever want to talk on the phone. Well, guess what? It just blew away. People love it because nobody has to look at my face. I can ask any question I want, and they're going to give me real answers, and they get a lot of support. And I know that in Nova Scotia we have a Family First program that's helping people who have concerns about their children in terms of their behavioral problems, etc. So it's not around HIV, but it's equally stigmatized, and those programs are just taking off. So it's another thought. Useful.
I guess one other way we could maybe like going with her comment about getting someone like youth involved, maybe something also to do with universities around the Atlantic provinces, and maybe possibly getting even like a health program, or even just in the current health programs, getting a class involved as an activity for them to go down to schools or spend time with young youth and talk about these subject matters, because university students are just recent graduates of of these basically situations, and they've been there and they've done that, and they wouldn't be that far, like they wouldn't have the problem of not understanding students, like high school students, because they don't have that generational gap, and that would be something both beneficial for both groups. So there's a thought.
I would like to mention a few strategies that I have seen being followed in India for HIV education and prevention. They made a TV series in which they actually use detective solving cases, and in each of those cases he encountered people who have sexually transmitted diseases or even AIDS, or people who are actually just kind of infected with HIV and not yet approved as AIDS. So while he's solving his cases, he happens to mention about HIV, how people get it and what kind of cancer it has been. And it goes both ways. I mean, people it gets interested in that stuff and they learn at the same time, because it might not be possible to actually force people to see documentaries on HIV specifically, and we can force them to read in newspapers and all that stuff. But actually, when they see a combination of that stuff in which they are actually interested, because people spend more time watching detective series and all that stuff, so if you combine both entertainment and education in a way that actually people understand in a simple way, so that works. And then they have free HIV testing everywhere. I mean, in the US health centers, so free contraceptives and all that stuff. I don't know about Canada, which actually is in Canada, so it's pretty much.
That's a cool idea to make it kind of integrated into the TV shows that they already watched.
And it was pretty much appreciated, because that was first time on Indian television that they were showing HIV-educated, HIV-related education.
Right.
So it was pretty much appreciated, and I think BBC kind of participated in that.
Very cool.
Another thing that I noticed even now during our discussions is when we say youth, we keep mentioning high school, and there's not a big focus on junior high, because you think 12-year-olds should be having sex to begin with, but they are. And, they're not getting the education on it because nobody's talking about it until later on in life, because, they think, well, they shouldn't be doing it, so why would we talk about it? I know I didn't have a sexual education class until grade 9, and there were people who started having sex in grade 6. So it's I feel like we need to focus on the younger people, catch it before it becomes an issue.
I think that's a really good point, because also in the policy scan with the Area Response Research Project, we were looking at all the different policies that we were reading, and we were saying, hey, what's the common definition of youth, because it varied so much. So I think that's a really good suggestion to consider the younger youth, because that's an important age that gets neglected.
I think a point that's related to that too is that there's also warning to educate healthcare professionals that 12-year-olds do have sex. So when they do go to the doctor, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Are you sexually active, and what's your definition of sexually active? Is it oral sex? Is it intimacy? Is it whatever? Just to get
perspective, when things happen and what gets talked about and what doesn't get talked about, and that's understandable. But it's kind of curious that we are all in the same province and we all have these very different experiences based on a rural location or not, or I don't know what the differences are, and I'm wondering, where is the standard? Where is the benchmark? You had your first sex ed class in grade 9. That seems outlandish. Like, why aren't those things being done in elementary school? That's when I had my first sex ed class. So what's the difference? Like, why? What's the disconnect for kids? Why is there discrepancies? Why in a place that is, between provinces, there's enough discrepancies? Why are there so many differences within a province? Why isn't there a standardized level of education or care? That seems like a huge gap, right? Because some people are getting information and some others aren't, or it seems in the discussion.
Just in regards to that point, the curriculum for Nova Scotia, the sexual health topics have dropped down grades. So there is topics from primary now all the way to grade 9 on sexual health. So this is the first year the teachers are required to actually implement the curriculum. So there is puberty in grade 4 and 5. We're talking about STIs in grade 6 now. If you're in grade 7, 8, 9, but all the topics, hypersexualization in grade 9. So a lot of the topics are a lot younger. So that's a positive thing that's coming.
But we do have an excellent curriculum. But some of the issues too is depending on what school board you're in. I was talking with my friend, and then there's within the school board the schools, and then the teachers, and the administrations, and then the parents. So the variability comes in all of those little potatoes there too. So I think that addresses some of the inequities that you're talking about in terms of this and variability in information. And the curriculum is outcome based, and how it's taught is sort of up to the individual teacher and what parts of the what outcomes are actually
Hopefully that new curriculum comes with some in-services for teachers, because I'm sure
that's the other part.
there's a whole lot of panic in the elementary schools right now where teachers do think, okay, now I have to talk about this with the grade 6s
Before we wrap up, you may have seen me loitering around the back with Post-it notes and spilling paint. I'm Alex. 4 things to mention to you guys. Number 1 is, if you have not already filled out a photo and audio consent form, please do before you leave. They're just at the table, just before the coffee. We like to turn the audio recording of this event, if it is of good enough quality, into a podcast so that we can send it around to other groups throughout the province who weren't able to be here. So if you get your consent for that, that'd be great. 2 is to stop off at the art project on your way out. Put down your name of your school that you're representing, put down your thoughts on this event, put down a picture, whatever you would like, or your name. 3 is our Youth Response, which is the major project that applied for funding to get this event to happen tonight. We are currently in phase 2 of this project. So you've heard a lot about our policy scoping review. And as we move into our second stage of this project, we are interviewing youth, we are interviewing people in the health sector, community sector, education and corrections sector. Anyone who has any experience dealing with HIV and HCV prevention in youth, and we're looking for people to interview. So, if any of you feel as though you may be that person or know someone, I can give you our website if you'd like more information, or I can send you our poster. So just come talk to me on your way out, and I'll give you whatever information you wish. And then I just wanted to say thank you to Zach for coming in from Newfoundland. Also to our youth committee members, some of whom have traveled in from out of town. And our volunteers who've been manning the tables and making sure everybody knows what's happening. To Just Us for hosting us here thank Pam, who has been with this project from the very beginning and put together the youth committee and make sure the youth committee is running well, applied for this specific grant, made this her baby, and put all this together. So thank you, Pam. And with that, do we have anything else? We have to wrap up.
Okay, so all of the suggestions, great comments, and questions that we've been talking about will be made into a little summary report. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, feel free to send me an email. It was the same email that was for the RSVP, so PL-Hudson, HUDSON, @nta.ca, and you'll be able to take a look at everything that was talked about here. And thanks again for everyone for attending, our wonderful interpreters, and our photographer as well. So